I'm Lisa Archer from Pickle Designs. Today we're going to be stitching our needle notebooks and our needle notebook 2 in the hoop designs. We have two different versions of our needle notebooks. The version that has the higher or the larger capability is called Needle Notebooks 2. That holds the larger packs of needles such as Class A and others. The original needle notebooks hold the smaller packs of needles such as Schmidt's. They come with the two different versions so that you can use whichever version fits the needles that you like to use. And they also come in multiple hoop sizes, so no matter what hoop size you have, you can still make one of our needle notebooks. To get started, you're going to need 3 fat quarters of fabric, and according to our instructions, just cut them to size, and on the backs of both fabric A and fabric B, you're going to fuse some fusible interfacing. We like a medium weight interfacing. You'll just fuse those to the backs of fabric A and B, and then on fabric C, you're simply going to fold one of the edges back. We've already done it, but you'll fold it back 1/2 inch, press to crease, and then you're going to put a piece of fusible seam tape on that folded piece. Okay, so we have our design loaded to our machine, and I have the mesh cutaway stabilizer hooped. Next, we're going to do stitch sequence 1, which will give us a placement line for fabric A. So we have our placement line stitched. Now we're going to place fabric A right side down over that placement line and tape it in place. You want to be careful when you're taping not to push your stabilizer down because it needs to be nice and taut in the hoop. And a piece on each corner should hold it just fine. Now we're ready to sew stitch sequence 2 to stitch the beautiful quilting stitches. For the thread on your quilting, I love a nice contrast. I use the charcoal so that it would show really well on this video, but feel free to use not just solid colors, but you can use variegated threads or twisted threads. You can use metallic threads. Have fun. This is your needle case and it's for you to use, so make it you. Use your favorite colors, your favorite threads, and experiment. Okay, so we've completed the quilting and I've changed the thread, and we're going to sew the next stitch sequence to stitch the word needles, and that is going to complete part 1 of the project. Our final stitch sequence has completed. We're going to remove the hoop from the machine and remove the project from the hoop. And then trim the project to an 1/8 inch seam allowance. The final step is to take a pin and place it at the bottom of the part 1 piece. This is to keep track of which is the bottom edge when you place the part 1 piece during the part 2 stitch sequence. Okay, let's get started with part 2. We have hooped our stabilizer and put it on our machine, and we have the part 2 design loaded to the embroidery machine. We're going to sew the first stitch sequence to stitch a placement line for fabric B. We have our placement line stitched. Now we're going to center fabric B over that placement line right side up, and we're going to tape that in place so it won't shift. So I'm going to go ahead and sew the next stitch sequence to tack down that fabric. Alright, we're going to sew stitch sequence 3 to stitch placement lines for the vinyl pieces. The next step is going to be placing your vinyl pieces, and you want to place it to the left. That leftmost stitch line should align with the left edge of the vinyl. You'll want to tape that in place, but you want to make sure that your tape is outside of all the stitch lines. You do not want a piece of tape over your vinyl because it will be sticky and it'll be a giant mess to have to clean up. So I'm just going to tape that at both ends. And then the next stitch sequence will simply stitch down that piece of vinyl. Next, we're going to place the second piece of vinyl. And again, make sure your tape is well outside all of the stitch lines. And then I'll put the hoop back on the machine, so the next stitch sequence to stitch down that piece of vinyl. So this is water-soluble topping, and normally you would use this on a towel or a t-shirt to make sure that your stitches stay above the fabric, but I like to use this on this project, and it helps to prevent your presser foot from pulling up these vinyl pieces on the next couple of stitch sequences. So you'll simply cover your project with a piece of water-soluble topping, and then you can tape it in place. The next stitch sequence that we're going to do is going to create divider lines, basically creating your pockets in the vinyl. So we'll put the hoop back on the machine and then sew the next stitch sequence to stitch those lines. The next stitch sequence is going to stitch little placement lines on the side of the project for both your elastic and for the part 1 piece placement. At this point, we have our placement lines. They're very small because we really don't want them to show. But you've got one on the top left, the top right, the bottom right, and the bottom left. Okay, before we go on to the next step, we're going to want to remove the tape and the water-soluble toppings. Our next step is to place fabric C. And you remember fabric C, it was the smaller piece. We folded 1/2 inch up wrong sides together, and then we covered that length with a piece of seam tape. We're going to be placing this piece of fabric over the top placement lines. So we've numbered them in the instructions. That is placement line number 1. That's placement line number 2. The fold of your fabric C piece is going to line just above those placement lines, and you want to center it over the project. You need to tape this in place very securely because you don't want this piece to shift. Oops. And then we're going to put a piece at the top as well. Now we're going to put our elastic piece across the lower placement line. You can use any type of elastic, but the fold over elastic is very pretty. It has a nice sheen and it comes in lots of colors. The right side is very shiny and the wrong side is very dull. We're going to be placing this right side up, so shiny side up. And you're going to be placing this one below placement lines 3 and 4. So that top edge of the elastic will sit just under those placement lines. That in place. And you don't need to stretch this out. Sometimes when you're sewing with elastic, you need to stretch the elastic out, but you do not stretch this piece. Just lay it flat across the project like so. We're going to now be placing that part 1 piece, the piece we stitched that had the needles, wording, and then those pretty quilting stitches. And you remember we placed a pin at the bottom. You're going to be placing this side, this piece, right side down with the pin at the top. You can now take the pin out. You want to make sure you take that out so it doesn't get stitched in. But that just helped you know exactly which side gets placed now. You're going to place this piece over fabric C. You're going to overlap it by 1/2 inch. And an easy way to know exactly where that 1/2 inch mark is we used 1/2 inch seam tape there. As long as we place that with the top edge aligned with the top edge of the tape, you're going to have it placed perfectly there. we want to make sure the presser foot does not pull up under here. So you can use Scotch tape. I'm just going to use this pink tape so that it shows up for you. And you just cover that top raw edge with some tape just to prevent the presser foot from hitting that. And we're going to put it back on the machine and we'll sew the final stitch sequence.
Okay, so the stitching is complete. We're going to take the hoop off of the machine, take the project out of the hoop, and we'll trim it to a 1/4 inch seam allowance, turn it right side out, and we'll finish up your project.
Move all of the tape. Tweezers to get that out. It's not a big deal. The green thread was the last color I used, so that is the seam that you're going to use for your 1/2 inch seam allowance, not that charcoal gray. And you can cut it to the 1/4 inch seam allowance and then cut the corners off. I like to do it all at once just to make it that much faster. So we have an opening where fabric A, or the part 1 piece, was placed over fabric C. There's an opening there, so you can turn it right side out through that opening. Since we're turning the vinyl, it is getting a little bit crunched up right now, and don't worry about it. It's gonna look very wrinkly, but you can cover it with a pressing cloth and press it with a warm iron and it will get any wrinkles out. Actually, we didn't do so bad at that. But you'd use your favorite turning tool to poke out the corners. And you can see it coming together. So I just need to turn fabric C right side out as well. And of course, you've got the corners there to contend with, but just take your time. And fabric C is basically getting turned to the back to meet up with fabric A. And there we go. You see how I just continue to work at it. This corner doesn't have any vinyl, so it's going to be a lot easier than the corner opposite. So once you have it turned out pretty well, you're going to want to take this to your ironing station and cover it with a pressing cloth, especially if you've used rayon or polyester thread, and just press it so it's nice and flat. You do want to press it from this side and only press fabric A. Remember, fabric C has a piece of seam tape on the back. We don't want to heat that just yet, but you want to get this nice and flat. Press from this side, not this side, because you don't want to put your iron on vinyl. You do need to iron the vinyl because it has become crunched up during the turning. Make sure you put a pressing cloth over it and use just a warm iron on that. Once it's pressed, now we're going to close it up. Remember, we put that seam tape on the back of fabric C. You're going to just gently lift up the seam tape. This can be a little bit tricky too, but just have patience. It's worth the final result. And then you'll want to take this to your ironing station and press that down so that it seals the fabrics together, and once you press it, it will permanently seal that closed. To finish, you'll put your needle packs in, fold in half, and then that piece of elastic that we placed will strap around the front. So once you finish your project, you can fill it with needles. They come in several sizes. Of course, this is the Needle Notebooks 2 pattern with that different quilting and font. The original Needle Notebooks have a different font and other straight quilting on them. You can make them for gifts and fill them with needles for a friend who stitches, or you can even make a smaller size for yourself for classes. You can throw it in your bag, take it to classes and retreats, and you always have the right needle needle on hand. You can find both the needle notebooks and the needle notebooks 2 embroidery designs at your favorite Pickle Pie Designs dealer or at picklepiedesigns.com. Thanks for watching.